The cruelest stories are rarely the loud ones. They are not found in scandals, in iconic photographs, or in the moments history chooses to repeat. They live in quiet rooms, behind closed doors, after the applause has faded and the lights have gone out. The story of Marilyn Monroe begins there, not under a spotlight, but in silence. Because before she became the most desired woman in the world, before her name became a symbol spoken with awe and longing, there was another woman who barely knew how to ask for love without apologizing for it. Her name was Norma Jeane, and becoming Marilyn Monroe may have been the most expensive price she ever paid. When Norma Jeane arrived in Hollywood, she was not confident, not fearless, not powerful. She was insecure, shy, deeply anxious, and painfully aware of how easily people could leave. Hollywood did not ask her to grow stronger. It asked her to disappear. To survive, she was told, she had to sacrifice everything she was and replace it with something the world could sell. Her hair was changed. Her voice was softened. Her walk was redesigned. Even her laughter was rehearsed until it sounded effortless. Every movement became calculated, every gesture refined into something pleasing, harmless, desirable. What the world later praised as natural charm was, in truth, a carefully engineered performance maintained every waking hour. Marilyn Monroe was not born. She was constructed, and the construction did not end when the cameras stopped rolling. She had to be Marilyn in interviews and photographs, at dinners, at parties, and in moments when she was too exhausted to remember who she had been before. The tragedy is not that she played a role on screen. It is that she was never allowed to stop playing it. The public did not want Norma Jeane. They wanted the illusion. And illusions are loved precisely because they are not real. To the world, Marilyn seemed free, playful, glowing with confidence. Men desired her. Women admired her. Cameras followed her as if she were light itself. But desire is not love. It is consumption. It looks at once, it takes, and it moves on. Marilyn was admired, but admiration does not hold you when you fall apart at night. It does not answer the phone when the fear creeps in. It does not stay when you stop being entertaining. And so, surrounded by people, Marilyn became increasingly alone. The more famous she grew, the less space there was for Norma Jeane to exist. On set, the pressure was relentless. Perfection was expected, not effort. When she arrived late or forgot a line, it was treated not as vulnerability, but as failure. What no one seemed to understand was that forgetting dialogue was not the problem. The problem was the terror beneath it. The fear that if she disappointed them, she would be abandoned. That if she stopped being flawless, she would stop being loved. Each mistake felt catastrophic because her worth had been tied entirely to performance. In private moments, the contrast was devastating. Marilyn Monroe entered rooms with her head held high, hips swaying, smile ready. Norma Jeane entered those same rooms quietly, eyes lowered, unsure if she belonged there at all. Marilyn laughed loudly and easily. Norma Jeane struggled with silence, with self-doubt, with the constant sense that she was pretending to be someone more lovable than she truly was. The public persona was armor. The private self was exposed and trembling. There's a particular kind of loneliness that comes from being loved for something you are not. It creates a permanent distance between who you are and how you are seen. Marilyn lived inside that distance every day. People touched her, praised her, fantasized about her, yet almost no one asked how she was holding together. And the few who tried were often pushed away by the system that needed her beautiful, compliant, and profitable. At the heart of this story is not glamour, but fear. Fear of being replaced. Fear of being forgotten. Fear that without the mask, there would be nothing left to love. And the most dangerous question of all followed her everywhere, whispered in moments of exhaustion and despair. Do you love me, or do you love Marilyn Monroe? Because the answer to that question would define whether Norma Jeane ever truly existed in the eyes of another human being. And for most of her life, the answer was heartbreakingly unclear. As the image of Marilyn Monroe grew larger, brighter, and more untouchable, the space left for Norma Jeane grew smaller and more fragile. Fame did not arrive as rescue. It arrived as reinforcement. Every success confirmed the lie that she was only valuable when she performed the fantasy perfectly. Hollywood rewarded the mask and ignored the cost of wearing it. And slowly, almost invisibly, Marilyn became a prison that Norma Jeane could never escape. The world believed Marilyn was effortless. That was the most dangerous myth of all. Effortlessness suggested ease, confidence, joy. But behind the scenes, nothing came easily to her. Every role, every scene, every line was a battle against panic, insecurity, and the crushing fear of failure. When she forgot dialogue or arrived late, it was not rebellion or arrogance. It was paralysis. Her mind would freeze under pressure, overwhelmed by the terror that one mistake could undo everything. She did not fear criticism. She feared abandonment. Directors grew impatient. Co-stars whispered. Studios complained. To them, she was unreliable. To her, she was drowning. The industry did not see a woman struggling to survive emotionally. It saw an asset that was becoming difficult to manage. And in Hollywood, difficult assets are controlled, medicated, or replaced. Marilyn was given pills to sleep, pills to wake up, pills to calm down, pills to endure. What was framed as help was often just another way to keep her functional enough to keep working. This is where the system revealed its cruelty most clearly. The star system was never designed to protect human beings. It was designed to manufacture consistency. Actors were brands. Their personalities were products. Their private lives were marketing tools. Marilyn was not encouraged to grow, to explore, or to fail safely. She was encouraged to repeat. The same roles, the same voice, the same smile, the same innocence laced with sexuality. The world wanted familiarity, not truth. As her image became increasingly sexualized, the distance between how she was perceived and how she felt became unbearable. Magazines, photographers, and audiences reduced her to a body, to a symbol of desire. She played along publicly, responding with humor and charm, because that was what was expected. But privately, she wrote of discomfort, of disgust, of feeling used. Men desired her, yet many frightened her. Attention surrounded her, yet intimacy escaped her. She was exposed everywhere and understood nowhere. Her relationships reflected this imbalance. She often gravitated toward older, powerful men, not out of calculation, but out of longing. Longing for safety, longing for guidance, longing for a paternal presence she never had. Again and again, she hoped that love would fill the emptiness left by a childhood shaped by abandonment and instability. And again, those relationships collapsed under the weight of expectations she could never meet. Marriage did not bring peace. It brought new forms of control, jealousy, and disappointment. When she married Joe DiMaggio, the fantasy was irresistible to the public. America's sweetheart and America's sports hero. But behind the image was tension, possessiveness, and fear. Joe wanted a wife who belonged to him. Marilyn belonged to the world. The conflict was inevitable. And when the world watched her iconic white dress rise in the subway scene, cheering and whistling, something inside her marriage shattered. The bruises that followed were not just physical. They were confirmation that love, once again, came with conditions she could not survive. Her marriage to Arthur Miller promised something different. Intellectual respect, emotional depth, seriousness. She believed that with him, she could finally be seen as more than a body, as more than a joke, as more than a fantasy. For a time, she believed she found someone who loved Norma Jeane. But even there, the cracks appeared. When she discovered his private writings, questioning her intelligence, her stability, her worth, the wound cut deeper than any public humiliation. The one person she believed might truly understand her was still measuring her against an idea of who she should be. At the core of all her relationships was the same repeating pattern. Marilyn was adored. Norma Jeane was neglected. Men fell in love with the image, with the glow, with the attention she brought into their lives. But when the vulnerability appeared, when the anxiety surfaced, when the sadness refused to stay hidden, patience vanished. She was too much, too fragile, too demanding, too broken. The tragedy is that Marilyn internalized these failures. She did not blame the system. She blamed herself. Each divorce, each abandoned relationship, each disappointed collaborator reinforced the belief that she was unlovable without the mask. That Norma Jeane, in her raw state, was simply not enough. And so she clung harder to Marilyn, even as the persona consumed her. By this point, loneliness was no longer circumstantial. It was structural, built into her identity. The world did not allow her to exist as a full human being. She was either Marilyn Monroe or nothing at all. And in moments of clarity, she understood this with terrifying precision. She knew that the applause did not belong to her. She knew that the desire was conditional. She knew that if the illusion cracked completely, there would be no place left for her to stand. This is where the sadness of her story deepens beyond fame or tragedy. Marilyn Monroe was not destroyed by excess or weakness or scandal. And the more perfectly she became that someone else, the more invisible Norma Jeane became. By the time the world began to suspect that something was wrong, the woman behind the image had already been fading for years, quietly, patiently, and completely alone. By the time the world began to sense that something was deeply wrong, Marilyn Monroe had already learned how to hide her pain with frightening efficiency. The smile was still there. The voice was still soft. The walk was still practiced and magnetic. But inside, the division between Marilyn and Norma Jeane had become a daily psychological battle. One existed to be seen. The other existed only to endure. And endurance, without relief, eventually becomes exhaustion. The deeper truth is that Marilyn was not collapsing suddenly. She was eroding slowly. Years of living as a symbol had trained her to perform happiness even when she felt empty, to respond with charm even when she felt threatened, to offer desire when what she needed was protection. This constant self-betrayal created a profound inner conflict. She could not reconcile the woman the world demanded with the woman she actually was. And the longer she tried, the more violent the conflict became. The industry framed her struggles as instability. Late arrivals, forgotten lines, emotional breakdowns were labeled as unprofessional behavior. Very few stopped to ask why one of the most photographed women on the planet seemed terrified of walking onto a set. The answer was not laziness or ego. It was fear. Fear of being exposed. Fear of failing. Fear that the mask would slip and reveal a woman who believed she had no right to exist without applause. Medication became the bridge between survival and collapse. Pills were no longer a temporary solution. They became routine. Barbiturates to sleep. Stimulants to wake. Alcohol to numb the spaces in between. What began as assistance slowly turned into dependency. Her body learned to function chemically, while her mind drifted further away from stability. Yet even this was normalized by those around her. As long as she showed up, as long as the camera captured the image, the cost was ignored. Behind closed doors, her private writings reveal a woman painfully aware of the contradiction she was living. She understood that men desired her body while often fearing her emotions. She knew that people praised her confidence while quietly resenting her fragility. She was celebrated as a fantasy and dismissed as a problem. This duality left her suspended between extremes, never fully accepted in either. One of the cruelest ironies of her life is that the public believed she enjoyed the sexual attention she received. In truth, she often described feeling uncomfortable, objectified, even repulsed. She played along because resistance only brought punishment. When she tried to assert depth or seriousness, she was accused of being difficult. When she leaned into the persona, she felt erased. There was no winning position. The few moments when she experienced genuine connection were rare and fleeting. They often came when someone spoke to her without expectation, without desire, without the need to possess her. In those moments, Norma Jeane surfaced. Shy, curious, almost childlike in her longing for reassurance. She did not ask for grandeur. She asked simple questions. Do you see me? Do you care? Will you stay? These moments were fragile because they were unsustainable. The world around her moved too fast. Schedules resumed. Contracts demanded compliance. Relationships were interrupted by publicity, jealousy, and power dynamics. Each time she allowed herself to believe in closeness, reality tore it away. And with each loss, her belief in permanence weakened. Her childhood, long buried beneath glamour, resurfaced with increasing force. The abandonment by her father, her mother's mental illness, years spent in foster homes and orphanages, abuse that taught her early that affection could come with danger. These experiences shaped her understanding of love as something unstable and conditional. Fame did not heal these wounds. It amplified them. Every perceived rejection echoed the earliest ones. As her emotional foundation crumbled, the question that haunted her became unbearable. If people only love Marilyn, and Marilyn is not real, then who loves Norma Jeane? This question did not arrive as philosophy. It arrived as panic, insomnia, and despair. It arrived in the middle of the night when a noise faded and there was no role to play. Her final years were marked by a growing awareness that the persona had outlived its usefulness to her, but not to the world. She wanted serious roles. She wanted respect. She wanted to be taken seriously as an actress. But the industry that created Marilyn resisted change. They needed her frozen in time. Eternal youth. Eternal seduction. Eternal compliance. Evolution threatened the brand. Isolation deepened. Trust became difficult. She suspected that everyone around her wanted something. Attention, control, access, profit. The line between care and exploitation blurred until she no longer knew who to believe. Even help felt dangerous. Therapy was inconsistent. Support systems failed. Promises were made and broken. In her most vulnerable moments, she did not speak like an icon. She spoke like a frightened woman asking not to be left alone. She did not seek fame. She sought reassurance. She did not seek desire. She sought safety. But safety was the one thing her life could not provide. When her life ended, the world reacted with shock, confusion, and conspiracy. But the truth is quieter and far more devastating. Marilyn Monroe did not die because she was weak. She died because she lived in a state of permanent emotional exposure, without shelter, without rest, without a place where she could be fully human. Norma Jeane was swallowed by the image she was forced to wear. The tragedy is not only that she died young. The tragedy is that she was never allowed to live as herself. Long before her final breath, she had been fading piece by piece behind the smile the world refused to let go of. By the time Marilyn Monroe reached the final phase of her career, the tension between survival and surrender had become impossible to ignore. What once felt like ambition now felt like obligation. The persona that had carried her to unimaginable heights no longer protected her. It demanded more than she could give. Every appearance required strength she did not have. Every expectation pressed against wounds that had never healed. And yet, stepping away was never truly an option. The world did not allow Marilyn Monroe to rest. She was increasingly aware that the system around her depended on her fragility. A calm, self-assured Marilyn would have been dangerous. An unstable Marilyn could be managed. Schedules were tightened. Decisions were made for her. Medication continued to replace genuine care. People spoke about her rather than to her. Even those who claimed to love her often loved the idea of being close to her tragedy, not the responsibility of protecting her humanity. Her desire to be taken seriously as an actress became more urgent, almost desperate. She longed for roles that reflected complexity, pain, contradiction. Roles that would finally allow Norma Jeane to speak. But Hollywood resisted. The industry feared that depth would damage the fantasy. They wanted the laugh, the innocence, the seduction. They wanted Marilyn unchanged. What they did not want was growth. Growth threatened the illusion. This refusal deepened her isolation. Each rejected attempt to evolve reinforced the belief that she was trapped, that her value was fixed, that her worth depended on remaining desirable, even as desire exhausted her. Aging, anxiety, and emotional exhaustion became enemies rather than natural experiences. The pressure to remain timeless robbed her of the right to change. Trust eroded further. She began to question every motive. Was kindness genuine or strategic? Was concern real or performative? Even friendships felt unstable. Too many people entered her life only to disappear when she no longer met their expectations. Over time, she internalized the idea that abandonment was inevitable, that closeness was temporary, that needing others was dangerous. Her dependency on substances intensified not because she wanted escape, but because she needed silence. Sleep did not come easily. Anxiety followed her everywhere. Pills became the only predictable relief. Yet each attempt to numb the pain only deepened it. What was meant to stabilize her instead blurred reality, leaving her more vulnerable, more alone, and more misunderstood. In moments of clarity, she recognized the cycle she was trapped in. She knew that the image had consumed the woman. She understood that Marilyn Monroe was not her true self, but a role she had been forced to inhabit until it became inseparable from her identity. This awareness did not free her. It tormented her. Knowing the truth without having the power to change it created a unique kind of despair. Her final connections were marked by fear rather than hope. She wanted reassurance, but no longer trusted promises. She wanted love, but expected loss. She wanted to be seen, but feared exposure. These contradictions exhausted her emotionally. The constant effort to remain functional while internally unraveling drained what little resilience she had left. When people later searched for a single cause, a single mistake, a single moment that explained her end, they misunderstood the nature of her suffering. There was no sudden collapse. There was only accumulation. Years of pressure. Years of loneliness. Years of living as an image rather than a person. The end was not dramatic. It was quiet, almost inevitable. Marilyn Monroe did not disappear because she lacked strength. She disappeared because strength alone cannot survive without support. She carried the weight of expectation for too long without relief. She was loved loudly and abandoned silently, admired endlessly and protected rarely. In the end, what the world lost was not just an icon. It was a woman who wanted nothing extraordinary. She wanted safety. She wanted understanding. She wanted to be allowed to exist without performance. Norma Jeane never stopped searching for that place. And the tragedy is that the brighter Marilyn shone, the harder it became for anyone to see the woman who was quietly breaking beneath the light. By the time Marilyn Monroe entered the last chapter of her life, isolation was no longer an emotion. It was a condition. It shaped her days, guided her decisions, and colored every interaction. What once felt like loneliness now felt like inevitability. She no longer asked whether people would leave. She assumed they would. The question was only when. The cruelest aspect of her decline was not public judgment, but private doubt. She had spent years trying to reconcile the two identities forced upon her, and she had failed. Marilyn Monroe could still command a room, but Norma Jeane no longer believed she deserved to be there. Each appearance required more effort than the last. Each conversation felt rehearsed, hollow, drained of sincerity. The gap between who she was expected to be and who she actually felt like became unbearable. Attempts to rebuild her life came too late and without protection. She sought therapy, entered clinics, tried to step away from the chaos, but the support systems around her were fragile and inconsistent. The same people who encouraged rest still demanded productivity. The same voices that spoke of concern still benefited from her visibility. Recovery requires stability, and stability was the one thing her life never provided. Her body began to reflect what her mind had carried for years. Insomnia worsened. Anxiety sharpened. Moments of clarity alternated with periods of confusion. Medication became both a crutch and a trap. Each pill promised relief, and each one pulled her further away from balance. She was not reckless. She was desperate for peace. The difference mattered, but few cared to see it. In the public eye, Marilyn was still a symbol of desire, still frozen in the fantasy that had defined her. But privately, she wrote of exhaustion, of wanting to disappear, of feeling like she had been hollowed out by expectation. She questioned whether she had ever truly been known, whether anyone had loved her without wanting something in return, whether there was a version of herself that could exist without being consumed. Her final relationships reflected the same painful pattern. She reached out, hoping for connection, only to feel misunderstood or abandoned once again. Men admired her brilliance, but recoiled from her vulnerability. Friends expressed concern, but struggled to stay present when the situation became uncomfortable. Over time, she internalized the belief that she was simply too much, too emotional, too unstable, too damaged. This belief did not arrive suddenly. It was built slowly, reinforced by years of conditional affection and unmet promises. Each disappointment layered over the last, creating a narrative she could no longer escape. That narrative told her she was lovable only as Marilyn Monroe, not as Norma Jeane. That she could be desired endlessly but never truly held. That she could be surrounded by millions and still be entirely alone. As her strength faded, the world continued to speculate, judge, and romanticize. Her pain became material. Her struggles became gossip. Even her decline was turned into spectacle. Few asked what it meant to live under constant observation while privately unraveling. Few acknowledged the cost of being transformed into an image before having the chance to understand oneself. When the end came, it did not arrive with drama or clarity. It arrived quietly, in the aftermath of years of erosion. There was no single moment of failure. There was only accumulation. Too much pressure. Too much loneliness. Too much silence after the noise stopped. Marilyn Monroe did not choose to disappear in a moment of weakness. She was worn down by a life that never allowed her to be whole. In death, the world finally paused. Questions surfaced. Conspiracies flourished. Tributes poured in. But for Norma Jeane, that pause came too late. Understanding arrived after the damage was complete. Sympathy followed absence. Recognition followed loss. The tragedy of Marilyn Monroe is not that she died young. It is that she lived without refuge. She carried the weight of desire, expectation, and projection without protection. She was taught to perform happiness while drowning in despair. And when she could no longer sustain the illusion, there was no safe place for her to land. What remains is a cautionary truth. Fame cannot replace love. Admiration cannot substitute safety. And an image, no matter how radiant, cannot survive forever without a human being behind it. Norma Jeane needed care, patience, and unconditional presence. Instead, she was given applause. And applause fades the moment the curtain falls. In the years after her death, Marilyn Monroe did not disappear. She multiplied. Her image became cleaner, brighter, safer than the woman who had lived inside it. The pain was softened. The contradictions were edited out. What remained was a symbol the world could admire without discomfort. And in that transformation, Norma Jeane was lost once again. Posthumously, Marilyn was turned into a timeless icon, frozen at her most luminous angle. Posters, photographs, films, and quotes reduced her to glamour, sexuality, and tragic beauty. The industry that failed to protect her in life now protected the fantasy of her in death. The complexity of her suffering was inconvenient. The loneliness was uncomfortable. So the narrative shifted. Marilyn became a cautionary tale about excess, or a romanticized victim of fame, or a mystery surrounded by conspiracies. Rarely was she recognized as what she truly was, a woman who was never given the conditions required to heal. The obsession with how she died overshadowed the more important question of how she lived. Endless speculation distracted from the structural reality that shaped her existence. She did not fall apart because she was weak. She fell apart because she was exposed without shelter for too long. She lived under constant scrutiny, pressure, and expectation without any reliable foundation of safety. Over time, even the strongest nervous system collapses under that weight. What is often ignored is how aware Marilyn was of her own predicament. She understood that her image had consumed her humanity. She spoke openly, in private writings and rare interviews, about feeling trapped inside a role she did not choose. She recognized that people projected their fantasies onto her and then punished her when she failed to fulfill them perfectly. This awareness did not save her. It only made the isolation sharper. Knowing the truth without having the power to change, it is one of the most painful forms of suffering. Her story exposes a deeper flaw in how society treats women who are admired. They are elevated, idealized, and desired, but rarely protected. They are praised for beauty, punished for complexity, and discarded when they age, struggle, or resist. Marilyn was not an exception. She was an early, extreme example of a system that thrives on consumption and indifference. Norma Jeane never stopped searching for a place where she could exist without performance. She longed for ordinary things: stability, trust, consistency, a home that did not feel temporary, relationships that did not depend on what she could offer. But her life moved too fast and demanded too much. She was asked to carry the emotional weight of millions while being denied the space to carry her own. The saddest irony is that the world believes it loves Marilyn Monroe. But love requires responsibility. It requires presence. It requires care beyond fascination. The affection she received was loud but shallow, intense but fleeting. It celebrated her image and ignored her needs. And when she finally could not continue, that same world expressed shock, as if the outcome had been unpredictable. Her legacy forces an uncomfortable reflection. How many people are admired without being understood? How many are elevated without being supported? How often success is mistaken for safety? Marilyn Monroe's life challenges the idea that visibility equals connection. She was seen by everyone and known by almost no one. Today, her face remains everywhere, smiling, luminous, eternal. But the woman behind that smile was tired, frightened, and alone. Remembering only the icon is easier than confronting the truth of her experience. Yet the truth matters, because it reveals how easily humanity is sacrificed in the pursuit of fantasy. Norma Jeane did not fail the world. The world failed her. It took everything she could give and offered applause instead of care. Her story is not a legend. It is a warning. A reminder that no image can replace a human being, and no amount of admiration can heal a wound that was never allowed to close. In the end, what Marilyn Monroe leaves behind is not a mystery to be solved, but a truth to be faced. Her life does not ask for speculation. It asks for recognition. Recognition of what happens when a human being is turned into an idea and then punished for failing to live up to it. Recognition of how easily beauty becomes a prison, how quickly admiration turns into entitlement, and how rarely compassion follows fascination. Marilyn Monroe did not live a life of excess because she wanted more. She lived a life of excess because nothing she was given ever felt like enough to replace what she lacked. Applause could not substitute safety. Desire could not substitute love. Fame could not substitute belonging. These were not flaws in her character. They were absences in her environment. Norma Jeane spent her life trying to earn something that should never have required performance. She wanted to be chosen without conditions, to be loved without having to be entertaining, to be held without being displayed. But the world only recognized her when she was shining, when she slowed, when she struggled, when she needed care instead of celebration. The attention shifted. Support thinned. Patience vanished. Her story reveals a painful contradiction at the heart of modern culture. We elevate individuals to extraordinary heights and then abandon them for reacting like human beings. We celebrate vulnerability as long as it remains aesthetic, controlled, and profitable. The moment it becomes inconvenient, we label it weakness. Marilyn Monroe lived inside that contradiction every day. She was asked to be endlessly open and endlessly invulnerable at the same time. The question that haunted her did not disappear with her death. It lingers, uncomfortably relevant. What does it mean to love someone who exists primarily as an image? Can admiration ever become care? Can desire ever transform into responsibility? Or does the system inevitably consume what it glorifies? Marilyn's legacy is often framed as tragic beauty, but that framing softens the reality. The true tragedy is not aesthetic. It is structural. She was failed by an industry that profited from her fragility, failed by relationships that confused possession with protection, failed by a culture that romanticized her pain while ignoring her needs. Yet her story also carries a quiet defiance. Even within the constraints imposed on her, Norma Jeane continued to reach for authenticity. She sought deeper roles. She questioned her image. She expressed discomfort with being reduced to her body. She asked for seriousness in a world that preferred simplicity. These efforts mattered, even if they were not enough to save her. They reveal that she was not passive in her suffering. She was aware, reflective, and trying. To remember Marilyn Monroe responsibly is to resist the temptation to freeze her at her most glamorous moment. It is to allow her complexity to exist without decoration. To acknowledge that behind the iconic smile was a woman shaped by abandonment, longing, intelligence, and fear. A woman who did not want to be extraordinary. She wanted to be safe. Her life forces a reckoning with how we treat those we admire. It asks whether we are willing to see the person behind the projection or whether we prefer the comfort of illusion. It challenges us to consider how many Norma Jeanes exist today, performing versions of themselves that earn approval while quietly erasing who they are. In the silence after the applause, Marilyn Monroe's story continues to speak. Not as a legend, not as a fantasy, but as a reminder that visibility is not intimacy, that success is not protection, and that no one should have to disappear in order to be loved. If there is a final truth in her life, it is this. The world did not lose Marilyn Monroe when she died. It lost Norma Jeane long before that, when it decided that the image mattered more than the human being. And until that choice changes, her story will remain unfinished, repeating itself in different faces, different eras, and different names.